Welcome back to experimentation from home, but through a video, and I am doing it. Today we're going to be doing some composting, which is just decaying organic matter. And composting is a model for decomposition in the environment. It's also a practice that we can do to improve our own soil quality and health and productivity by recycling nutrients back into it. You can add just about anything you want into a compost bin, ranging from paper and cardboard to leaves, sticks, and twigs, as well as eggshells, coffee grounds, food scraps, leaves, and so on. The things that you definitely shouldn't add into your compost bin include meats, cheese, dairy, and oils, because these will facilitate the growth of unwanted types of bacteria that will make it really stinky and attract, hopefully not, but possibly pests. Also, you shouldn't add any citrus into your compost bin because that will lower the pH or increase the acidity of it and be threatening to the community of organisms that lives in the soil. Soil is a very complex resource. It's not just organic, or it's not just dirt, but it's also the living things inside of it, such as bacteria, fungus, and worms, that all help with breaking down and recycling those nutrients back into the soil. To find out more about the services of not only the soil, but the organisms that live in the community, let's set up a model of this model and find out more. As we get going into this experiment, let's get suited up. We also need to do something with that hair that you've been growing. Yep, that hair. Not just because it might get into chemicals or the solutions you're working with, but when your hands are dirty and your hair gets in your face, you don't want to touch it. Much better. I'm going to wear a hat to keep it out of my face, and I'm also going to wear a mask because I'll be dealing with some foul odors. Additionally, I'm going to clean away my normal kitchen area and prepare it for the materials that I'll be using, such as some form of adhesive to hold the bottle together after we're done. In the past, I've used the silicone before, and the volatile organic compounds have simply caused all organic life inside of compost bottles to die, so I'll be using clear packing tape. I will upcycle this plastic pie container to scoop and mass my soil mixture. To do cutting, do not use your kitchen scissors. Those are meant for other things. Instead, ask for and maybe get supervision in using a utility knife. Identical plastic bottles, which will be filled with the soil mixture containing rice husks, hummus, sand, and cocoa fiber. And finally, newspaper, food scraps, and leaves. Replicate the same procedure with all of the bottles. You'll need a bottle, utility knife, and a permanent marker. First, begin by cutting off the label from the bottle. When you are not cutting, put the knife down. If you have the knife in your hand, you will cut something. Let's not have it be you. Use the permanent marker to guide yourself along the lip of the curved part, and use that as a guide for knowing where you're going to cut below that. This is important because when reassembling the bottle, we're going to want to have even ends to attach to each other. As you carefully cut around, make sure the blade is pointing down toward the surface you're cutting in case it slips. You don't want it slipping toward your face. It is always good to come up with a plan before getting into action. So once you have all of your bottles cut, develop a plan of how you intend to fill it. In general, the model that I'm going to be creating on this whiteboard will have soil, leaves, food scraps, and newspaper. Depending on the volume of the bottle and how much I'm able to fill, the number of layers and contents might vary a little bit. In general, though, soil composting requires a balance of about 4 brown to 1 green, and so I'm going to have about 4 times more soil than I will have other forms of organic matter. Additionally, soil is a community of organisms as well, so I'm going to try and replicate that amount of diversity. As I'm assembling it, I'm going to be using my kitchen scale to keep the masses as similar as possible between the layers and the bottles. As I'm pouring the soil into the bottle over the container to reduce the amount of mess, I'm going to first put on my food scraps, which are going to consist of pears, one of my favorite fruits, as well as some very old leftovers that I made too much of and is now moldy in my refrigerator. You can compost food that you cook in your house, but you should generally not use meat, cheese, or eggs inside of there because as the bacteria and fungus decomposes it, they will generate lots and lots of odors. It'll also attract pests, and the amount of bacterial growth will be a lot because there's a lot of nutrients in meats and cheeses. On top of that, I'm adding another layer of soil. Before I add the additional layer, I'm going to mass out the soil I'm going to put on the very, very top. What's going to go in between there are some crushed leaves that I collected from outside, as well as some hojas de coca that I used in some tea. I'm going to rip up some newspaper to mix it up in there, and then once that's all sufficiently in there, I will top that off with some soil. If there's not enough room at the top, don't keep pouring it on because that'll just pour over and create more of a mess. Rather, compact it and then you can add some more on top. Finally, I'm going to add a little bit of water, although my food scraps contain a lot of excess water. And finally, I'm going to add 2 worms that I've been harvesting or growing in my own composting bin. Those will maybe encourage the decomposition process, and we'll see how those interact with the components of the compost bottle over time. Lastly, I'm going to seal it up by matching up the overlapping lips, and then I'll wrap it with adhesive tape to keep it sealed. Decomposition requires a great deal of oxygen, and so I will poke a few holes in top in order to allow for air to flow in. We need to collect data. Science is not just having fun and setting up experiments, but it is also collecting empirical data. We use that empirical evidence in order to support what we know in theories. And so this is going to be my apparatus that I'll use to measure the changes in the layers, or at least the thicknesses. On the back, I'll use a color scheme so I know which day goes with which color. And I'm going to use measurements on a weekly basis. Before moving on, I'm going to also label what the top of those lines represent for the layer. And here is my final data, including a reminder of where I can find all of my different bottles as I'm collecting data on a weekly basis. Before you do anything else, it's your responsibility to clean up. Use some diluted bleach and wipe off your countertop. The bleach will kill any microbes that are on the surface so that it doesn't spread as you're preparing your next meal. I've chosen 5 different locations that have similarities but enough differences from each other in order to see how different variables affect the rate of decomposition. Some of these variables include light, and others could possibly include temperature. Double check that it's okay to put this in your refrigerator before doing so.